Hi, my name is Donald Kronos. This video is about making democracy work. It's not about me getting my way or you getting your way. It's about us getting our way. Since we don't all agree on everything, that generally means finding the best compromise. But to do that, we have to work together. In a true democracy, we should each have about equal say on issues which affect us all. Personally, I see the idea of a president of an entire country as about as senseless as placing one brain cell in command of an entire brain. However, ripping out the system and starting over makes about as much sense as getting rid of all the farms and killing all the domesticated plants and animals over the fact that there's still hunger in the world. In other words, that's not the best way to make things better. Understanding evolution, especially outside of biological evolution, is the real key. While I'm not a big fan of the concept of representative democracy, especially where there's a topmost representative who's in some sense above everyone else, the fact remains that the election of a president into such a position is one of those issues which affects us all. And so it is an area in which we must learn to cooperate. For example, imagine that you're supporting a presidential candidate who is extremely unlikely to win in the state where you live and are allowed to vote. Or imagine that you have no candidate to support at all, but you're against the candidate who is assumed most likely to win the electoral votes of the state where you're allowed to vote. This is, of course, assuming the system in the United States of America, where I live. Other systems are going to be a little different. But, okay, so does that mean that you should give up? Of course not. Now, you can change the candidate name in the following example, the state, or any other details to suit your situation. Imagine you live in some hypothetical state, and that a candidate named Curly Hamilton is expected to win your hypothetical state's 42 electoral college votes, which would bring him closer to winning the presidency. Now, if you really think he's the best person for the job, you probably see that as no problem. But imagine you were strongly in favor of some other candidate, or perhaps you have reason to believe Curley got himself on the general election ballot through blatant cheating and collaboration, which should have gotten him disqualified. Or maybe you're just really against the idea of Curly Hamilton as our president, for whatever reasons you might have. In this hypothetical scenario, you might look at who else has a chance to win the electoral votes of the hypothetical state in question. If you could just get some better candidate to win, that would make those 42 electoral votes unavailable to the candidate you wanted to avoid, which already makes your vote valuable, even if the candidate who won in that state didn't have any electors to vote for him or her on behalf of your state in the Electoral College. Of course, the rules vary from state to state, and it's entirely possible that this better candidate could acquire electors in time for them to vote in the Electoral College. One way or another, you would have increased the odds of an outcome that you would be more happy with, and that should make your vote valuable to you and to others who think like you do. So, what makes me the expert on all this? Nothing really. I'm just a concerned citizen who's been paying attention for a very long time and wanted to share some of my observations in the hopes that it would help the people of the USA to get out of a situation most people seem very displeased with. I'm one of the lucky ones, since my preferred candidate, Bernie Sanders, is very likely to win the state I live in. And if he does, there's a good chance I'll be selected as one of the electors who gets to vote for him in the Electoral College. I've been an activist since 1976, and I've been trying to correct a flaw in our electoral system since 1969, when I was only 5 years old. I've worked a variety of jobs in my life. I'm currently an actor living in California. Does that make me rich and famous? Absolutely not. But lots of people assume such things. Heck, when I lived in Bolivia Lots of people thought there that I was rich and famous just because I'm an American. Well, Americano in Espanol. I always found that rather humorous since Bolivia's in South America. So really, they're as Americano as we are. And, well, we, that is, meaning the people living in the United States of America. Or for that matter, the other United States in North America, which is officially named Los Estados Unidos Mexicanos. You probably know it as Mexico. But my point is that people make assumptions based on labels, and they're not always correct, such as mistaking democratic socialism for socialism under a dictatorship, or mistaking socialism for communism. Not the same thing. More generally, human thought can be flawed. So, how can this help you? I'm getting to that. You see, we're told that we live in a democracy. That means we, the people, are in charge. We make the rules. But of course, it's a representative democracy. So we make the rules through people who represent us. How is this different from a dictatorship? Well, supposedly, we choose who represents us. So why does our presidential election always seem to feel like a coin toss, where most of us don't like either side? This is intentional. It's an application of a logical fallacy known as the false dichotomy. I'll get back to that later, but first, I want to dispel a myth about voting in an election. We've been taught to think that the purpose of our vote is to decide who gets elected. It's not. Other people vote too, and it's extremely unlikely that your vote or my vote will decide who the winner is of any election that we vote in. What our vote really does is affect the odds. If you're told that only two candidates have any chance of winning, but in reality, there is some better candidate with a slim chance of beating them both, your vote can increase that chance. This is the truth of the matter, and the truth can be very powerful. If you vote for a candidate that's already likely to win, but that you're settling for over better choices because you think they have no chance, you are in fact decreasing the chances of those better candidates winning. Some people already understand this. This understanding is why so many people choose not to vote. They recognize that if they vote for the lesser of two evils, they're effectively helping to elect evil and preventing the election of good. But unfortunately, many fail to see that they can also increase the chances of electing good by voting for someone better than either of those we're told are the only ones who can win. This brings us back to the false dichotomy fallacy I mentioned earlier. The false dichotomy refers to assuming or claiming that there are only two options when in fact there are more. This is also known as bifurcation, false binary, a false dilemma, the either or fallacy, black and white thinking, and by various other names, each with its own scope of related meanings. There are variations of this fallacy, which are more or less inclusive of each other, but I'm going to stick with a simple explanation because I want as many people as possible to understand what the problem is, how we can work around it for now, and also how we can fix it for the future. It's just as much a fallacy to assume that there are only three options or only four options when in fact there are more. If you hear someone claiming that their presidential candidate is the only one who can beat the other two, that's three options, but it's still being applied as a false dichotomy because they're telling you that the two options are their preferred option or the set of options contained in another false dichotomy, when in fact, in most states, you can write in a preferred choice of your own if you really want to. And if enough people across the country did likewise, and if enough people jumped through the legal hoops necessary to demonstrate that this alternative is a valid option and what the people really want, it is possible you could elect this people's choice candidate rather than any of the options you've been offered. But there's a catch. The people who represent us are generally not chosen by us, and the people who actually choose them have been doing so for generations. Like hidden royalty, we can't blame when things go wrong because we can't see who's really in control. They don't want us deciding, but they know we outnumber them, so they've made sure the system stays complex enough that it generally takes a team of lawyers to understand it, because most of us can't afford a team of lawyers. And if we can't understand it, we can't easily figure out how we can decide for ourselves what they really don't want us deciding. In fact, the only way bad candidates win it all is by scaring you into voting for them, by convincing you that they're the only one who can beat a candidate they portray as worse. My aim here is to suggest a way that we can elect a good candidate for president rather than the lesser of two evils. But first, have you already decided who to vote for president? If so, will you be happy with that candidate if they get elected? Or would you prefer somebody else? Although I will not ask you to vote for my preferred candidate, I do want to let you know that I have filed in California as a candidate for presidential elector for Bernard Sanders, who is silently running for president, but protecting the progressive platform he worked so hard on while the Democratic Party cheated him out of their nomination. I'll help you support any good candidate, but I want you to know that Bernard Sanders is a viable independent and a valid write-in candidate in several states, including California, which has 55 electoral college votes. So don't let anyone tell you that he can't win, because he can. Did you know that if neither Hillary or Trump reach 270 electoral votes, they can't win outright? The House of Representatives would have to decide who our next president is if nobody reaches 270 from among the top 3 electoral college vote getters. The current Republican-controlled House really seems to despise both of the currently selected major party candidates, so they're likely to choose someone better if we give them the option to do so. Of course, some of the current House members will not be there when the time comes to make that decision, but many people are planning on voting for Bernie-crats, who are very likely to choose the most progressive president they can. So if we do this right, we could end up with a president who wants positive change as badly as we do. Might you be willing to write in Bernie or vote for some other good presidential candidate to help make that happen? If so, I hope you'll share this with your friends and relatives so they also can learn how to help us elect a good candidate. There are several flavors of opt-deny out there, and you may have heard of one or more of them. What I'm talking about here takes the idea much further, and although it's about electing any good candidate, I've named it Opt Bernard in honor of Bernard Sanders, who is an option and is both my preferred presidential candidate and the key to making sure that no bad candidate can win outright, since he has the support to win most of the states in which he is a valid write-in candidate, and perhaps more, if we can get the word out to enough of his supporters that he has not resigned his presidential candidacy and can still win. So this doesn't have to be a choice between two bad options and several who are still very unlikely to beat either of them. We can do better than a coin toss, where both sides are elephant asses, that of course being a reference to the Dem Cartel's mascot, and the mascot of the other wing of their organization since one of those candidates is basically a Democrat running as a Republican, and the other is basically a Republican running as a Democrat. Oligarchs and plutocrats often team up such political puppets as their Plan A and Plan B, effectively telling us that we better vote for their Plan A to prevent their Plan B from winning. If we do as we're told, their Plan A wins. If we see how bad their Plan A really is and vote for their Plan B out of fear, then their Plan B wins. Either way, we the people lose. You and I most likely share in common the fact that we would rather elect a better candidate than a worse one. That's a place to start. So let's work together on this. We may disagree on which ones are better and which ones are worse, but let's set that aside for now and look at how we can help each other, in spite of that potential difference. This applies to political offices other than that of United States President, but that's the office I'm mainly talking about in this video. Hopefully, some people will be able to apply what I'm saying to electing better candidates into other offices as well, especially in coming elections, when they can apply it to the primaries to weed out the bad choices rather than the good ones. If you believe you're supporting the election of the best candidate, a good candidate, or even a candidate who's just not terrible, then you should share this video. I'll explain why, but first I want to explain the video's title, and then how we can work together. The title of this video comes from an accidental portmanteau. That is a word formed from parts of two other words. Recently, I was out with a friend of mine who is also a fellow activist, promoting the election of the best presidential candidate. But she had one candidate in mind as the best, and I had another in mind. Obviously, this presented a challenge with regard to combining our efforts. To make a long story short, somewhere along the way, when we were talking about Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, my friend got tongue-tied and Clinton and Trump came out as clump. Since we both see the two of them as a team, this shortened form was rather fitting. Now, I'm not saying that you should see them as a team. That's up to you. I'm also not saying that you should be for clump or against clump. But as for me, I see Hillary Clinton cheated my candidate out of being on the general election ballot. And I see Trump as her Plan B, whom she helped to win the Republican Party nomination. So in a sense, he also got on the ballot through cheating, since people were deceived into voting for him through efforts to make it look like he was the only one who could beat whichever Republican candidate scared each voter the most. Now they're using the same tactic to fool you into voting for each of them out of fear of the other. Many people have fallen for this deception. Even so, if you honestly want one of those two as president, I'm not going to discourage you from voting for whichever one that may be. However, it seems to me that most people in the USA are against electing either of those two and feel that they're going to get one or the other regardless. In other words, they're anti-clump because they're scared of clump getting elected. So they're planning to vote for clump in order to prevent the supposedly unpreventable election of Clump as our president. So that's why I named this video Anti-Clumping. Because this is how we can elect someone we collectively see as good, rather than merely the lesser of two evils. It's not so much about being against the two candidates whose names went into the portmanteau of Clump, as it is about being against bad candidates who tend to come clumped together as a team, playing bad politician and worse politician against each other to scare people into voting for one as a vote against the other, when in reality we have no way to directly vote against either of them and have it counted. And a vote for one is not really a vote against the other, it's a vote against everybody but that one. If we realize that there are more than two candidates at stake here, that makes a difference. I just went with the name because it's catchy, and I think most people in the USA are against electing either of those two, even if they're planning on voting for one of them. Of course, if I'm wrong and most people honestly want a member of the Hillary Trump team to be elected as president, then this video will help make that happen, because this is about making democracy work. But I don't expect many Trump supporters to share this video, because why should they even try, since their chosen candidate already has high odds of winning and doesn't really need their odds increased. As for the rest of you watching this video, I hope you will see that I'm on your side, even if we won't be voting for the same candidate. After all, it's not about what I want, it's about what we want. And you outnumber me. If I'm lucky, most of you also agree with me. If you're lucky, most of us also agree with you. However, true democracy isn't about mob rule. That's why I've never had a political party affiliation. So how can I help you if you're supporting a political party's nominee? The answer is simple. The same way as you can help me in supporting my independent candidate, Bernard Sanders. That is, spreading the word that any electoral college votes won by any good candidate will not be going to a bad candidate. So we are stronger against the bad candidates if we work together. I don't think that's what Hillary's campaign meant by stronger together, but it works for me. We are stronger together, and we're not sheep. Understand that while some of us, like me, support more than one presidential candidate, but only have one that we're willing to vote for, there are other people who support only one candidate because they don't yet know of a better one available to be voted for, or because they don't see that if we work together, the best candidate can win, whoever that might be. There are also people who, like me, support more than one candidate, but unlike me, do not support one so much more than the rest as to be inflexible about who they'll vote for. So here's where I start to get more specific. Many Bernie supporters out there have given up on voting at all after what happened in the primary election. There are people who have been trying to win the votes of Bernie supporters for a different candidate by claiming that Bernie's not still running for president. This causes many people who believe such lies to join those who have given up on voting. We all know who that helps: the bad candidates. So chances are they're behind such efforts. But keep in mind that while Bernie can win the presidency and is a valid write-in candidate in many states, including California, which has 55 electoral votes at stake, there are also many Bernie supporters in other states, besides those where he's a valid write-in candidate. And of course, many people in all states who literally do not know that there are more than two presidential candidates at all. So if you prefer some candidate other than Bernie, or think that some nearly as good candidate is more likely to win and should get more votes to help them do that, you don't have to steal votes to make your favorite candidate more likely to win. There are plenty of people who will lend their vote freely if they can just be convinced that voting for a good candidate isn't throwing their vote away. And that's my main point. Not voting for a good candidate is throwing your vote away, because that's not increasing the odds of a candidate winning who the voter would be happy with. And being able to increase the odds of an outcome the voter will be happy with is what makes the right to vote valuable. Voting for a bad candidate is worse than not voting at all. even if the intention is to prevent the election of a seemingly worse candidate, because such a vote decreases the odds of any outcome which the voter will be happy with. Voting for a good candidate, whether the voter thinks that candidate can win or not, is better than not voting at all. If you can explain that to anyone out there who has no plans of voting because they think voting is about deciding who wins, you may gain a vote for your preferred candidate, or potentially a vote for some other good candidate. But you will almost certainly not gain a vote for a bad candidate. So you can come out ahead even if you don't mention any candidate's name at all. If you do mention a good candidate, better yet. The fact that Bernie Sanders is not likely to be on the ballot does not mean he can't be written in. And it is not necessary to win the electoral votes of all states in order to win the election. So don't try to say that he can't win unless he's a valid option in all 50 states. And by all means, don't try to claim that not being on the ballot means he can't win. In most states, that's what write-in votes are for. In fact, some states will not count a write-in vote for a candidate who is already on the ballot. However, states which generally do not allow write-in votes at all tend to have exceptions. So, for example, in such a state, you might be able to write in a candidate on an absentee ballot or on an early voting ballot, in which case the assumption is that your write-in vote is supposed to be for someone who's on the normal ballot. So by all means, if you're going to write someone in, check to see whether that candidate is already on the ballot first, and if so, use that option. There are also states in which Bernie can win, but will not receive any electoral college votes. Or probably not. Again, there may be ways to work around that. And a few states which make it almost impossible to write in any candidate at all. Many Bernie supporters in such states could be somewhat easily convinced through honest discussion to vote for a good candidate other than Bernie Sanders, considering that it's easier than having to fight against their state disenfranchising them. However, you won't win their vote by lying to them, so don't try to tell them that Bernie can't win. Sure, you might convince them that the lie is true, and some might actually never find out otherwise. However, those that learn the truth are likely to see you as more of an enemy than an ally, and may wish to stop your candidate from being elected through deception. After all, cheating is not winning, and they've already been through that in the primaries. You might not know this, but there are over 1,000 presidential candidates registered with the Federal Elections Commission. However, most of them have a nearly 0% chance of winning even a single state, let alone the presidency. Among other reasons, because they're simply not well known enough. Obviously, being well known is a requirement for actually winning a presidential election in the United States of America. Unfortunately, being wanted as president is not. Until recently, Bernie Sanders was not very well known, but he was very well approved. In fact, Bernie Sanders consistently has the highest approval ratings of any senator in the United States. And running for president has not changed that. Polls consistently show our two most well-known presidential candidates as having higher disapproval ratings than approval ratings. In other words, they're more unwanted than wanted. Both of them, at least according to the polls. Now, perhaps you are one of those people who actually approves of one of them. Would you want to impose your choice on others and risk learning the truth too late? After all, maybe there are reasons why so many people don't trust either of those two. My suggestion is that we should let people make up their own minds about who to vote for. Bernie Sanders suggested the same thing, right after warning that if he or anyone else were to try to tell you who to vote for, you shouldn't listen. It's your decision who you vote for. But many people give up and choose not to vote at all. because they feel there are no good choices. Of course, many of those people would be happy to cast an anti vote directly against a bad candidate, but unfortunately, there's no such option on the ballot, and no way to have such a vote counted. Yet. If enough of those people could be made aware that there are more than two candidates who can win, and convinced to vote for whoever they think is best, or at least for someone who they think is good, such a candidate could win electoral college votes, which would otherwise go to bad candidates. This would almost certainly keep any bad candidate from getting the 270 electoral votes needed to win the election outright. If no candidate gets at least 270 votes from the Electoral College, then it will be up to the House of Representatives, in the Congress we just elected new members to, which of the top 3 electoral vote recipients will be elected as president. This increases the chances of some good candidate being elected, especially if that candidate managed to receive enough electoral votes to make it into the top 2. I've done the math, and Bernie Sanders has the potential to actually receive the most electoral college votes, which would make him the obvious choice over the other 2 we're told can't be beaten. Since the Republican representatives tend not to like either of those 2, and any Bernie-crats we elect into the House of Representatives are pretty sure to support Bernie for president. However, if we do this together, it will increase the odds for all candidates that people honestly see as good, and not merely as the lesser of 2 evils. And I'm fine with any good candidate winning. So can we work together and elect someone good? Perhaps the one I want most, and perhaps the one you want most? After all, if we're both correct in thinking that we're supporting good candidates, then any electoral votes taken from a bad candidate will increase the chances of our candidates winning, regardless of who they are. Of course, my candidate, Bernie Sanders, can't be out campaigning for himself, because he entered into a contract with the Democratic Party to run for their nomination. And if he fails to support the candidate they chose to put on the ballot, they could claim he wasn't on their side and find grounds to destroy the work he put into making their platform more progressive, which he has expressed concerns of, as that would be bad for the United States, and more to the point, for the state of Vermont, where, as a U.S. Senator for that state, he has an obligation to the best interest of his Vermont constituents. Bernie takes that responsibility very seriously. However, he has also expressed that he wishes he could be out campaigning all over the country. If we campaign for him without him even asking, the truth can reach enough people to prevent the election of a bad president, without giving the Democratic Party an excuse to make their platform less progressive. So help me spread the word that Bernie Sanders is still a presidential candidate and can win. Feel free to mention if you happen to think another candidate is a better choice, or if you happen to think that it would be better to help another candidate win electoral college votes in states where you have reason to believe it may be difficult for Bernie's votes to be counted, or where he may not be able to get electors even if he wins. But let people make up their own minds and encourage them to do their own research. This way, you can help your candidate gain a few votes while also helping set right some of what has been done wrong. If you're a third-party candidate supporter, keep in mind that even if your candidate doesn't win, this may help them reach 5% of the popular vote, which qualifies their party for federal funding. Something which I happen to not approve of, but understand the wish for on the part of those supporting such a party. But do you really think that goal of 5% is worth trying to steal votes from a good candidate who has the potential to defeat the bad ones and save us from a potential disaster? I hope not. But if you do, then shame on you. There are more important things than money, such as the future of humanity and the survival of life on the planet Earth. But don't forget that many Bernie supporters feel as I do, that any good candidate is acceptable. And even if they won't personally vote for your candidate, they may be willing to help your candidate indirectly, as I'm doing with this video, by helping to spread the word that we can work together to democratically elect someone that most of us can be happy with, rather than settling for a virtual coin toss election deciding between two bad apples. So feel free to tell people why you think your candidate is worth voting for. But please, don't go saying that Bernie isn't running or trying to steal his votes. Expect some people to tell you they're going to vote for Bernie no matter what. That has been the case all along. When I thought my vote for Bernie Sanders would not be counted here in California, that didn't change my mind about voting for him. Just as in 2012, I wrote in an anti-vote directly against Mitt Romney, knowing that there was no way such a vote was going to be counted and applied as it was intended. It was my vote, and it was an honest vote, and that was enough for me. But even as someone who has wanted Bernie Sanders for president for 35 years, I can make a case for some Bernie supporters voting for another good candidate in places where they may not be able to cast a write-in vote at all, or even where they can, but have valid reason to believe their vote would be more effective if cast toward another good candidate. And if you see someone claiming to support one candidate while trying to steal votes from another, call them out on it and tell them that they must not be very supportive of that candidate they claim to be supporting, since trying to steal votes is not a practice any good candidate would support. Earlier I said I would explain why you should share this video. If you don't see any good reason by now, I'm probably not going to convince you anyway, but here goes. This video is long and detailed, and not everybody who starts watching it is going to get this far. Thanks for being one of those who had the patience. There are probably few like you in that respect, compared to the many who are not likely to get this far. Since like minds tend to attract each other, you probably know other people who, like yourself, are more likely than most to take the time to hear out what I have to say. Of course, you can tell many people the highlights of what you got out of this video, and they'll be much more likely to pay attention through such a shortened and personal rendition. However, if you can get even one person to watch the entire video, that person might see in it something important which might not have caught your attention, or which you might not have understood the same way. That person will then be able to share their understanding as well. And the plan, as understood collectively, will be more complete and more likely to succeed. Also, consider the fact that most people watching this video will probably not share it. If you want more people to be in on this plan to work together toward electing a good presidential candidate and the best candidates we can for other offices as well, both in this election and in the future, then just as you can change the odds of a good candidate winning, you can also change the odds of this video reaching a large number of people. I don't know what percentages of people watching this will actually get this far, nor what percentage of people watching this video will share it with others. So I can't give you the math with accurate numbers, but I can give you a little math with some reasonable hypothetical numbers to hopefully give you a better idea of what difference sharing this video can make. Imagine roughly half the people watching this video share it with an average of 2 people each. That's about enough to keep viewers trickling in for some time, since that's an average of each person sharing it with one other. However, keep in mind that these are averages and not constants. In other words, there will be fluctuations in such a rate. Perhaps for a short time, it may be 100% of viewers sharing the video with 2 people each. And 100% of those people watching at least part of it, and then likewise sharing with two people. That means one shares with two, and together those two share with four more. Then those four combined share with another eight, and those eight combined share with another 16. If this keeps up, it reaches another 32, then 64, then 128, then another 256, then 512, 1024, 2048, 4096, 8192, 16384, 32768, 65,536, and so on. That is, as long as that trend keeps up. However, fluctuations could also result in 0% sharing the video, and then that's it. But you made it this far. You're special. You can make a difference others would fail to make. Imagine, for example, if one person like you were to share this video with two people per day. As long as such a person keeps this up, there would always be a chance of a time coming when shares would increase exponentially, at least for a while. Or imagine if one person in 10 watching this video got this far, but those people shared the video with an average of 10 people each. This would also be enough to keep views trickling in on the average for some time, with the potential to die out completely, but also with the potential to eventually spread like wildfire for a while. And if only one person in 10 got this far, and only 1 in 5 of those people chose to share it at all, but on the average, those who did were sharing it with 100 people each, well, that's 100 times being shared for each 50 people who see the video. That's called period doubling. And it works just like when everyone shares it with two people each, except that the effect is slower because it takes 50 people to accomplish a single instance of doubling, rather than one person, but the rate of increase is still exponential. So, would you be one of those people who shares it with 2 others, or with 10 others, or perhaps with 100 others? I put quite a bit of work into this to help all of us select good candidates rather than bad ones. And while not everyone you share it with will watch the whole thing, some won't even watch part, everyone who does is one person you will have given the results of all my work to, so that they too can benefit from our combined efforts and learn how to help us make a positive difference, whether we agree on who's the best candidate to elect or not. Isn't that worth some of your time and effort? Will you please work with me? Together, we can make things better. We just have to learn to combine our efforts and make the best of our differences, rather than working against each other when we have enough in common that we can find a way to do better than that. So, put away the fabric softener and let's do some real anti-clumping. Thanks for watching.